If you have ever visited a national park, stood at a trailhead sign, posed for a photo beside a map worn smooth by thousands of hands, you have trusted a place that was never built for you. Because national parks are not sanctuaries. They are not contained. They are not controlled. They are vast systems of land that existed long before boundaries, before visitor centers, before rules printed on laminated boards. The signs are there to make the space legible. The paths are there to make it feel navigable. But neither of them changes what the land is, or what it does when people move through it. Most visitors believe the danger is obvious. The altitude, the weather, the wildlife, the cliffs, the rivers, the cold. Those are visible threats. They are measurable. They can be warned against. The real danger is what doesn't announce itself. The trail that looks unchanged but no longer leads out. The silence that settles too evenly across the trees. The distance that refuses to shrink no matter how long you walk. The sign that appears after the danger instead of before it. The sense that something has already noticed you and adjusted. National parks feel safe because they are famous. Because millions of people pass through them every year. Because there are maps and rangers and well-worn paths that suggest oversight. But the land does not recognize popularity. It does not track visitors, and it does not stop responding just because people are watching. A park does not have to be hostile to be lethal. It only has to remain indifferent while you make one assumption too many. A short hike, a familiar overlook, a service road that is not on any map, an echo that does not return the way it should, a landmark that never gets closer. Tonight, these are not stories of extreme survival or reckless risk. These are ordinary visits to places people trust, recorded by people who believe the systems around them worked. 5 national parks, 5 visitors, and 5 moments where the environment did not behave as expected. Not violently, not suddenly, but precisely enough to remove the idea of escape. So read the signs. Stay on the trail. Check your distance. Listen to the space around you. And if the land begins to feel too stable, too quiet, or too patient, do not assume it is broken. Because sometimes the wilderness isn't dangerous because it is wild, but because it is working exactly the way it was meant to. Story 1. Still afternoon, Yosemite National Park, California. I chose the hike because it was supposed to be short. That was the appeal. A clean afternoon loop to a popular overlook. Something that would give me just enough elevation to feel earned without turning the day into a commitment. The ranger at the trailhead told me most people finished it in under 2 hours. I remember that specifically because he smiled when he said it. The kind of casual reassurance you give someone who looks like they've already checked the weather 3 times. The sky was clear in that high, thin way. Yosemite skies get in the afternoon, pale blue fading toward white near the sun. Not dramatic, not ominous. The air smelled like warm pine and granite dust. Families passed me on the way back down, kids dragging sticks, couples arguing quietly about where to eat afterward. Everything felt grounded, measured, normal. I even checked my phone before starting. 2:14 p.m. Plenty of daylight. The trail was wide and well marked, packed dirt with the occasional stone step carved into the slope. Signs appeared exactly where the map said they would. Distance markers made sense. Every few minutes, the sound of other hikers faded in and out behind me, replaced by wind in the trees or the dull crunch of my boots. I remember thinking how comfortable it felt to be alone without actually being alone. The first switchback came sooner than I expected. I paused there, more out of habit than fatigue, and took a sip of water. The sun sat high over the valley, not directly overhead, but not drifting either. I checked my watch, 2:31 p.m. I took maybe 20 steps before the second switchback. That was the first thing that felt off. Not alarming, just compressed. Trails shorten sometimes, I told myself. Maps lie. Perception changes when you're focused on your footing. I didn't dwell on it. I kept walking, enjoying the way the forest opened slightly to my left, the valley dropping away in layers of green and stone. Another glance at my phone, 2:44 p.m. I smiled at how little time had passed. Barely half an hour in, and I was already climbing. Between the second and third switchbacks, the trail leveled out. The dirt softened. Pine needles muffled my steps. The air felt cooler, but the sun hadn't moved. I noticed that before anything else, that the shadows under the trees hadn't shifted at all. They sat in the same positions, dark ovals pooled at the roots, unchanged. I checked my watch again, 3:18 p.m. That seemed reasonable. I walked another stretch, long enough to feel my breathing deepen. I passed a fallen log that someone had carved their initials into, dated 1997. I remember thinking how clean the cut still looked, as if the wood hadn't aged. The third switchback came and went. Then the fourth. I stopped again, not because I was tired, but because something in my body told me more time had passed than the world was admitting. The light felt wrong, too steady, like a photograph pinned over the sky. My phone said 4:02 p.m. My watch said 3:26 p.m. I laughed, actually laughed out loud, the sound loud and strange in the quiet. Devices desync all the time, batteries glitch. I tapped my watch, reset it, checked the phone again. The sun still hadn't moved. I tried to estimate the angle the way my dad taught me when I was a kid, using the slope of the shadows against the rocks. They should have been longer by now. The valley should have darkened just a little. It hadn't. I kept walking. That was the mistake, I think. Or maybe it was inevitable. The trail ahead looked identical to the trail behind me. Same curve, same pattern of roots breaking through the dirt, same cluster of boulders to the right. I passed a wooden post with a faded arrow pointing uphill. I was certain I'd already passed it before, but the grain of the wood felt different when I touched it. Smoother, like it hadn't been exposed as long. My phone buzzed. No notification, just the vibration. When I looked at the screen, it showed 6:47 p.m. The sky was still afternoon blue. No orange, no pink, no lengthening shadows. I stood there longer than I should have, turning in a slow circle, checking the horizon from every angle. The forest was quiet in a way that didn't feel peaceful anymore. Not silent, but restrained. Like sound was being held back. I decided to turn around. I remember feeling relieved by the decision. Rational. Responsible. I even pictured myself telling the ranger about the weird clock issue later, laughing about it over a map spread across the counter. I took one step downhill, then another. Then the trail flattened. I stopped, confused, and turned back toward the overlook direction. The trail sloped up again. I turned back downhill, up again. I stood there, heart beginning to thud harder than the climb justified, and realized the grade wasn't changing. It was only my orientation that was. The path itself was level. I checked my phone. 8:12 p.m. My watch read 3:41 p.m. The sun was exactly where it had been since the second switchback. I started walking faster. Not running, but purposeful. Counting steps. 20, 30, 40. My legs never burned. My breathing never spiked. Sweat dried almost instantly on my skin, like the air refused to hold heat. I passed the carved log again. The initials were newer this time. No date. The fourth switchback appeared again, then the third, then the second, each one spaced too closely, like someone had folded the trail in on itself. The valley to my left never changed. The light never dimmed. I felt like I was walking through the same minute over and over. I tried calling out. My voice sounded wrong. Not echoing, not carrying. It felt like it stopped, just beyond my mouth, absorbed by the trees. I told myself not to panic, because panic burns energy, and energy matters on trails. But the longer I walked, the more impossible it became to believe this was still a trail at all. I checked my phone again. 9:03 p.m. 0 missed calls. No new messages. No signal. The battery was still at 82%. I don't know how long I walked after that. The concept stopped meaning anything. My thoughts began looping the way the trail did. I would notice the same rock twice, in the same glance. I would blink and feel like I'd skipped something important. Eventually, I noticed something that made me stop completely. My shadow. It was beneath me, short and sharp, like it belonged to midday. But when I raised my hand, it didn't move right away. It lagged, just a fraction of a second, like it had to decide whether to copy me. I stood there, arm half raised, afraid to move further. My phone buzzed again. This time, the screen showed 2:14 p.m., the exact time I started the hike. The watch agreed. I turned slowly, scanning the trail behind me. The trailhead sign stood a few yards away, clean and new, the map board unmarred by fingerprints or dust. The parking lot beyond it was empty. No cars, no people, no sound. The sky beyond the trees was the same pale blue, I took a step toward the sign. The distance didn't change. I took another. Nothing. The sign stayed the same size, the same clarity, like a painting hung just out of reach. I realized then what the problem wasn't. Time wasn't broken. It was complete. The trail wasn't looping. It was finished. The afternoon wasn't refusing to end because it couldn't, but because it already had, and this was the part left behind. The space between moments where nothing moves forward anymore, but nothing is allowed to disappear either. I checked my phone one last time. 2:14 p.m. Behind me, the trail curved upward, inviting, familiar, exactly as it had been when I started. Ahead of me, the trailhead waited, unchanged, unreachable. I turned back toward the switchbacks, because moving felt safer than standing still. As I took my first step uphill again, I realized something else. I wasn't tired. I hadn't been tired all day, and I couldn't remember what it felt like to be. Story 2. Where the Trail Goes Quiet. Great Smoky Mountains National Park, border between North Carolina and Tennessee. I picked the Smokies because I needed something that could hold still. That sounds strange written out, but it was the honest version. The last few months had been loud in ways that had nothing to do with sound. Notifications, deadlines, people asking the same questions in slightly different voices. Even when I was alone, my head played the world back at full volume. I wanted a trail that would do what trails always did, which was keep going forward no matter what you were carrying. The ranger at the visitor center gave me the kind of practiced smile reserved for people who say they're just doing a quick backpack. He asked where I planned to camp. I pointed at a spot on the map that seemed reasonable, a designated site near a ridge that had a decent view and a water source listed nearby. Plenty of folks out there, he said, tapping the paper with one finger. Stay on the marked trail. You'll be fine. I remember that line. Stay on the marked trail. You'll be fine. The Smokies looked exactly like they're supposed to look in early fall, even if the calendar said it was still technically summer. Green on green on green, the kind that makes depth hard to judge. The air was damp without feeling cold. It carried a soft scent of leaf rot and moss and something sweet, like sap warming in the sun. Clouds hovered low over the ridgelines, drifting slow enough to look stuck at the trailhead. I took the usual photos, the sign with the name, the map board, the safety reminder about bears and water crossings. I checked my phone out of habit. 1 bar of service, which was better than I expected. I texted one person just to have proof I tried to be responsible. Starting now, back tomorrow. Hearts, thumbs up, a joke about not becoming a missing person poster. Nothing that felt heavy. I put the phone away before the screen dimmed on its own. The first stretch of trail was wide and forgiving, packed dirt with exposed roots that looked like veins stretched over the earth. The trees stood close enough to keep the sun from feeling direct. Light came through in broken pieces, shifting patterns on the ground like slow water. A group of day hikers passed me within the first 10 minutes. 2 women with bright trekking poles and a man with a loud laugh and a dog that pulled against its leash like it had someplace better to be. The dog sniffed my pack as they squeezed by, and the man apologized without sounding sorry. I smiled and said, "All good," because that's what you say when the world is still operating on normal rules. Their laughter receded behind me, growing thin in the trees. Then it was just the forest, my boots, my breath, the soft clink of my water bottle against a carabiner. That was the first thing I noticed, how pleasant it was to hear only what I brought with me. Everything else, the wind in the canopy, the distant call of something I couldn't name, the occasional drip of condensation off leaves, felt like background music. Not important. Just proof I wasn't alone. The trail climbed gradually. Switchbacks that didn't feel like switchbacks. It followed the slope like it was trying not to disturb it. Every so often, there were blazes on trees, small rectangles of paint that caught the light and reassured me I was still where I was supposed to be. I passed a creek crossing, shallow and clear, stones darkened by constant moisture. The sound of the water was steady, clean, immediate. I crouched to fill my bottle and listened. The creek sounded too close, like it was right at my ear. Even when I stepped back, it wasn't alarming, just odd, like the sound didn't travel the way it should. It stayed where it started. I shrugged it off. Acoustics in the woods do that sometimes. The trees absorb and scatter. It's the whole reason forests feel quiet even when they're alive. I kept walking, An hour later, I realized I hadn't heard a bird in a while. That's not the kind of thing you notice all at once. It's a slow absence, like realizing you haven't checked the time in hours. At first it was just that the calls were fewer. Then it was that the calls were gone entirely, and the space where they should have been was so clean it made my ears itch. The wind still moved through the upper branches. I could see leaves tremble and ferns sway in the light draft that drifted along the trail, but it didn't sound like anything. No rustle, no whisper, no sigh. I stopped walking and waited, because my brain insisted I was missing it. Maybe my hearing had adjusted. Maybe there was a low hum of cicadas I'd tuned out. Nothing came. I shifted my weight. My boot scuffed the dirt. The sound was muffled, like it had been wrapped in cloth. That made me smile, just a little, because the thought that followed was ridiculous. It's like the forest is holding its breath. I started again, and for a while I focused on the practical things. Pace, water, the way the trail markers showed up on schedule, the weight of the pack settling into my hips, my shoulders loosening with each mile. I told myself the quiet was a gift, exactly what I'd come for. When I reached the first sign for a junction, I took out my phone to check the map. No service now. That was expected. The GPS dot still worked. It placed me on the correct trail. It said I was moving in the right direction. It also said I was covering distance faster than I should be. I watched the little blue dot slide forward on the screen. It moved smoothly, like it was on rails. Every few seconds, it jumped ahead, as if the phone couldn't decide how far I'd gone. I clicked the screen off before I could overthink it. At some point in the afternoon, I began to notice my own breathing. Not because it was strained. It wasn't. The climb was steady but manageable. I should have been in that comfortable zone where breath becomes background. Instead, each inhale sounded damp and small, like I was breathing into fabric. Each exhale vanished the second it left me. There was no lingering of it in the air. I stopped again and took a deeper breath, the kind you take when you want to hear yourself in a quiet room. The sound didn't get bigger. I put my hand over my mouth and exhaled hard into my palm. I felt the heat. I felt the moisture, but I didn't hear anything. I stood in the middle of the trail with my hand on my face, waiting for my brain to explain it away. Maybe my ears were clogged. Pressure. Altitude. Except the Smokies weren't that high, and I'd been fine that morning. I swallowed, yawned, tilted my head side to side. Everything felt normal. I tapped my trekking pole on a rock. The sound should have been sharp. It came out as a dull knock that seemed to stop halfway to my ears. I tried it again, harder, same result. It wasn't silence. It was something worse. It was sound being cut short. My stomach tightened the way it does when you realize a familiar place has become unfamiliar without changing its appearance. I started walking faster. The trail narrowed as it moved deeper into denser growth. Rhododendron arched overhead, creating long tunnels of green. The light shifted into something dimmer and flatter, like the sun was being filtered through layers of damp cloth. My skin stayed cool despite the effort. Sweat didn't bead the way it should. It just disappeared, absorbed by the air. I passed another hiker. Or, I thought I did. It was a man moving in the opposite direction, a pack on his back, hat pulled low. He stepped off the trail to let me by. I gave him a nod and a hey. He didn't look up. That happens. People keep their eyes down when they're tired. But there was something off about the way he moved. Too smooth. No shifting of weight. No micro adjustments to roots and rocks. Like he was gliding along the ground instead of stepping. I turned my head after I passed him to see if he'd react or say something. The trail behind me was empty. Just a narrow line of dirt curling away between the trees. I stopped so abruptly my pack straps bit into my shoulders. I stood there and listened, waiting for footsteps behind me. A snapped twig, a cough, anything that said someone was there. Nothing. The air was so still I felt like I was underwater. I told myself he must have stepped off the trail and into the brush, taking a break. I told myself I hadn't looked directly at him long enough to be sure. I told myself I was letting the quiet get into my head. I kept going. Another mile, maybe two, passed in a way that didn't feel like passing. I watched the same kinds of trees repeat, the same moss patterns on rocks, the same clusters of ferns. The blazes appeared, but not always on the side I expected. Sometimes to the left, sometimes to the right, sometimes directly ahead, forcing me to angle toward them to stay on track. When I reached what should have been the next junction, the sign was gone. The post was there, the weathered wood, the metal brackets that held the signboard, but the sign itself was missing, leaving only pale rectangles where it had shielded the wood from sun and rain. I stared at it longer than I should have. A missing sign wasn't impossible. Vandalism, storm damage, maintenance, but the brackets were clean. No broken edges, no bent metal, as if the sign had been removed carefully and recently. I lifted my phone and checked the map again. The blue dot placed me at the junction. The trail ahead split into two thin lines on the screen. In real life, the trail split into three. The third path was narrow, almost hidden, cutting between two thick clusters of rhododendron. It looked newer than the others, dirt darker, edges softer. No blaze marked it, no sign pointed to it. It felt like looking at a door you hadn't noticed in your own house. My first instinct was to take the left fork, because that matched the map. My second instinct was to take the right, because it looked more used. The third path sat there like a thought you can't ignore once it appears. I stepped closer, just to see. The air changed near it. Not cooler or warmer, just heavier. Like stepping into a room where someone has just stopped talking. I backed away. The forest stayed quiet. I took the left fork. Within 10 minutes, the trail curved and brought me back to the same junction. Same blank post. Same pale rectangles where the sign should have been. Same three paths. My stomach dropped. I checked my phone again. Same dot, same junction. I turned in a slow circle, trying to pick out any difference. A rock, a root, a fallen branch. Nothing stood out. Everything looked freshly arranged, like the forest had been tidied. I told myself I'd taken the wrong fork. I told myself the trails looped sometimes. I told myself the junction was closer than I'd thought. I took the right fork. I walked until my legs should have begun to complain, until my calves should have tightened, until I should have been sweating and breathing hard. None of that happened. The trees did not change. The light did not change. The quiet did not change. And then the trail curved and I was back at the junction again. My mouth went dry. My body did the thing it does in the early stages of panic. That surge of heat that doesn't match the weather, the feeling of being too aware of your own skin. I forced myself to breathe slowly, even though my breathing was soundless and therefore unhelpful. Okay, I thought. Okay, if the left and the right bring me back, then the third is the only one that doesn't. That was the logic my brain offered, the desperate kind. I stood at the junction a long time, trying to hear anything beyond my own heartbeat. The problem was, my heartbeat wasn't making noise either. I could feel it in my throat, a pulsing pressure, but the sound of it was missing, as if my chest was insulated from the world. I walked to the third path. The dirt under my boots looked damp, but it didn't stick. It didn't leave prints. Pine needles lay across it in a neat scatter, undisturbed by wind or animals. I looked for a blaze. None. I took out a small roll of orange survey tape from my pack, the kind I sometimes bring to mark off a campsite or hang a bear bag line. I tore a strip and tied it around a low branch at the entrance to the third path. The tape didn't flutter. It hung perfectly still, as if it had been glued. I stepped into the path. The rhododendron closed in almost immediately, their leaves forming walls. Light dimmed. The air grew thicker. The scent changed from pine and rot to something mineral, like wet stone. My skin prickled, not with cold but with awareness, the feeling of being observed without being seen. My boots moved across the dirt without making sound. I paused and scraped the sole of my boot against a rock, hard enough to throw grit. No sound. I tried to cough. The motion happened. The noise didn't. My throat tightened, because suddenly it wasn't just the forest that was quiet. It was me. I kept walking, because stopping felt like agreeing to something I didn't understand. The tunnel of rhododendron opened into a small clearing that looked wrong. Not unnatural, not like something impossible, just too tidy. The ground was flat, covered in a layer of soft leaf litter that looked unstepped. A ring of stone sat near the center, the kind people build for fires, but there was no ash, no blackening, no soot. A log lay nearby like a bench, bark intact, unweathered. I looked at it and felt a slow, sick recognition. This was a campsite, or an imitation of one. I walked to the stone ring and crouched. The stones were cool to the touch, damp with something that wasn't due. The leaf litter inside the ring was unbroken, no sign anything had ever been burned there. I set my pack down. It made no sound hitting the ground. My hands shook as I opened the top compartment and pulled out my headlamp, even though the light around me still said afternoon. My phone said 3:22 p.m. I didn't trust it. I put the headlamp on anyway and clicked it on. The beam appeared. It looked normal, but the click of the switch was silent. I took out my water bottle and unscrewed the cap. No sound of plastic threads. I swallowed. No gulp. I felt like I was watching myself through glass, seeing the motions but not hearing the proof. My mind tried to keep things practical. Stay calm, make camp, wait for another hiker, find the marked trail again. But every instinct I had was screaming that waiting was the worst thing I could do. I stood and called out, "Hello?" My mouth shaped the word. The clearing did not receive it. The trees did not answer. The air didn't even tremble. I tried again, louder, and felt the vibration in my chest without hearing it. Is anyone there? Nothing. My eyes began to water, not from emotion, but from the sheer wrongness of it. Silence is one thing when it's earned. Silence is restful when it's empty. This felt full, like something had filled the forest with cotton and pressed it into every gap. I grabbed the orange tape from my pocket because I needed something bright and human in my hands. I tied another strip around a branch at the edge of the clearing, then another and another, marking the way back out. Each strip hung perfectly still, no movement, no sound. I turned toward the path back to the junction. The rhododendron wall was unbroken. The opening I'd come through was gone. Just leaves and branches, interlaced like they'd grown that way for years. I stepped closer, pushing at the leaves with both hands. They resisted, like dense brush should. But I felt something else, too. A spring to it, a tension, like the wall was not just plants, but a surface pretending to be plants. I shoved harder. Leaves snapped, but I heard nothing snap. I tore through enough to make a gap and force myself through. On the other side was not the path. On the other side was the clearing again. I stumbled and nearly fell, catching myself on a tree trunk. My palms pressed against bark, slick with moss. I should have heard my own frantic breathing. I didn't. I turned in place, fast, searching for the orange tape. It was gone. All of it. The branches were bare. My pulse hammered in my throat, a pressure without sound. I forced myself to slow down. Think. Look for details. The stone fire ring was still there, pristine. The log bench, the leaf litter, and beyond the clearing, in the darker line of trees, I noticed something I hadn't noticed before. A strip of fabric hanging from a branch. Not orange. Faded blue. I walked toward it, each step unreal in its noiselessness. As I got closer, I recognized what it was. A piece of backpack strap, torn and frayed, with a plastic buckle still attached. It had the same brand logo as mine. I stopped staring at it, because the implication made my stomach twist. Someone had been here. Someone had marked. Someone had tried to leave. I followed the line of sight beyond the strap, scanning the ground for other signs. That's when I saw them, half buried in leaf litter near the base of a tree. Boot prints, not fresh, not crisp, but pressed deep, as if someone had stood there for a long time. A long time without shifting, without moving forward or back. I crouched and held my hand over the print, trying to compare the size. It matched mine. A cold wave rolled through me. I looked up. In the trees surrounding the clearing, there were other pieces of fabric, other straps, other torn bits of gear caught in branches like flags, some faded, some newer, all hanging perfectly still. Markers. Not mine, not just mine. A cemetery of attempts. I backed away, turning, searching again for the opening in the rhododendron. Nothing. Only green walls and the perfect stillness of the tapeless branches. My phone vibrated in my pocket. The sensation made me jump, because it was the only thing that still had a voice. I pulled it out. No signal. The screen displayed the time, 3:22 p.m. It had not changed since the clearing. I stared at the numbers until they blurred. Then a notification banner slid across the top. Emergency alert. For a second, relief flooded me so hard my knees almost gave. An alert meant connection. It meant the outside world still existed. It meant something had finally punched through the quiet. I tapped it with a shaking finger. The banner expanded into text. Silence advisory. Do not stop moving. I read it again, because my brain refused to accept it. Silence advisory. Do not stop moving. There was no sender, no location, no explanation. Just that line, stark and clean. I lifted my head, suddenly aware of how still I'd been. How long I'd been standing in the clearing, listening for a sound that wasn't allowed to reach me. The pressure in the air changed. Not louder, not quieter, closer. The leaves around the clearing trembled, just barely, like a breath taken behind a door. I turned slowly, every muscle tight. At the edge of the clearing, where the rhododendron should have been solid, there was now a narrow gap, an opening no wider than my shoulders, dark beyond it. A corridor of green leading somewhere unseen. The opening looked recent, as if it had been cut, as if something had made room. I stepped toward it without thinking, because the warning had given me a single rule I could follow. Do not stop moving. My foot crossed a line into the corridor. The clearing behind me felt farther immediately, as if the air thickened between us. I kept moving, one silent step after another, because stopping felt like giving the forest what it wanted. The corridor twisted. The leaves brushed my shoulders without sound. The ground stayed soft. My phone remained frozen at 3:22 p.m. Ahead, the darkness deepened, and in that darkness, I saw something pale and familiar. A white trail blaze, painted clean on a tree trunk. Relief hit me in a sharp, bright rush. I reached for it, hand outstretched, moving toward the mark like it was a lifeline. My fingers touched the paint. The bark under it was smooth, too smooth, like plastic. The blaze was not paint. It was a sticker, pressed onto the tree like a label. I stared at it, because that meant someone had put it here. Someone had wanted me to think I'd found my way back. My phone vibrated again. This time, the screen went black, then lit up with a single line of text. You can be quiet now. And somewhere behind me, in the place where sound should have been, I felt the forest lean in, waiting for me to agree, because my feet were still moving, but slower, slower, and the corridor ahead was narrowing, and my lungs were working. And for the first time all day, I couldn't remember what it sounded like when a person screamed. Story 3. Beyond the closure signs, Yellowstone National Park, Wyoming. The first sign I noticed was already behind me. That should have been enough to turn around. It was a simple thing, bolted to a metal post at the edge of a narrow service road. Yellow, with black lettering, the kind you see everywhere in the park. Thermal area. Stay on boardwalk. But I was already 10 steps past it when I registered what it said, and by then the road ahead looked so ordinary that stopping felt more suspicious than continuing. I told myself I'd just missed the sign on the way in. That happens. The park is full of warnings. They stack up after a while, blur into background noise, like mile markers on a highway. I was visiting Yellowstone alone, filling a few days between work obligations with the kind of sightseeing that looks responsible on social media. Geysers, overlooks, short walks with long views. I'd already done Old Faithful that morning, stood with a crowd and watched the earth perform on schedule. By early afternoon, I wanted something quieter. That was when I saw the service road. It branched off from a paved pullout near one of the less crowded thermal basins. A thin strip of gravel disappearing between low hills. No gate, no chain, just 2 tire tracks and a faded sign that read authorized vehicles only. No mention of closures. No red slash. No language that felt urgent. I stood there longer than I should have, scanning for cameras, for rangers, for anything that would make the decision for me. Nothing happened. Cars passed on the main road. Families unloaded strollers. Someone laughed. The service road looked unused, but not abandoned. Gravel was pressed flat, not overgrown. The tracks were recent enough to still have definition. I stepped onto it, telling myself I'd go just far enough to see what it connected to. The air changed almost immediately. Not temperature, not smell, exactly, just pressure. Like the space around me was denser, more attentive. The sound of the road faded quickly, replaced by a low hiss that I assumed was distant steam. Yellowstone always sounds like it's breathing, if you listen long enough. The road curved gently, then dipped. The hills on either side rose higher, blocking the view back to the main area. I checked my phone. Full service. Map loaded. The blue dot placed me exactly where I expected, even if the road itself didn't appear on the map. That didn't bother me as much as it should have. Maps lag behind reality all the time. The first thermal feature I encountered wasn't marked. No boardwalk, no sign. Just a shallow pool beside the road, its surface a dull gray-blue. It looked inactive, almost dead, the kind of feature you pass without stopping because nothing's happening. As I walked by, the water rippled. One slow bubble broke the surface, then another. The bubbles weren't random. They rose in a line, spaced evenly, like someone tapping a finger against glass from below. I stopped. The bubbling stopped too. I waited, watching the surface smooth itself back into stillness. Steam drifted lazily upward, thin and unremarkable. Coincidence, I said out loud, because saying things out loud usually makes them smaller. My voice echoed strangely, not bouncing back so much as flattening, like it had nowhere to go. I took another step. The pool bubbled again, this time closer to the edge. I backed away, and the water stilled. A laugh escaped me, sharp and uncomfortable. Thermal features react to movement sometimes, pressure changes, vibrations. That's basic physics. I walked on, more aware now, eyes tracking every patch of ground. The road narrowed into a trail. Gravel gave way to packed dirt, then to a series of wooden planks laid end to end, an improvised boardwalk that didn't match the style used elsewhere in the park. No railings, no informational placards. Just wood, weathered but sturdy, leading deeper into the basin. The next sign appeared after the boardwalk ended. Danger, unstable ground. It faced backward. I noticed that only because I turned around to orient myself. From the direction I'd come, the sign was perfectly readable. From the direction I was heading, it was just a blank metal back, dull and scratched. I stared at it longer than I meant to. Signs get turned around sometimes. Wind, vandalism. Maintenance crews forget things. But this one was planted solidly, sunk deep into the mineral crust. It hadn't been twisted. It had been placed that way. I stepped past it, carefully, testing the ground with each footfall. The earth here looked solid, but Yellowstone teaches you not to trust appearances. Pale mineral deposits formed delicate patterns underfoot, veins of white and rust and yellow, beautiful and lethal. Steam vents dotted the area, small openings that exhaled intermittently. I counted them without meaning to. 1, 2, 3. They hissed in sequence, each releasing a breath, then falling quiet. It took me a moment to realize they were responding to me. When I stopped walking, the vents went still. When I moved, they resumed, not all at once, but in order, like a wave passing through the ground. My skin prickled. I checked my phone again. Still service. Still daylight. Still normal, according to the screen. The trail dipped into a shallow depression, where the air hung heavier. The smell of sulfur intensified, sharp enough to sting the back of my throat. Ahead, a larger pool came into view, its surface opaque, milky white. It was surrounded by a ring of darker ground, scorched and cracked. A sign stood beside it. Thin ice. It made no sense. The temperature was mild. There was no ice anywhere, thin or otherwise. I walked closer, drawn by the wrongness of it. The pool was perfectly still. No bubbling, no steam. It looked inert, safe in the way things that kill you often do. As soon as I reached the edge, the surface broke. Not violently, not dramatically. Just a slow, deliberate roiling, like something underneath was adjusting its position. Heat radiated upward, sudden and intense. I staggered back on instinct. The pool settled. I stood there, heart pounding, staring at my own reflection warping in the water. That was when I noticed the footprints. They crisscrossed the mineral crust around the pool, overlapping, pressed deep, too deep. Some were half melted, edges softened, as if the ground had been warmer when they were made. They led toward the pool. They did not lead away. My mouth went dry. I followed the trail beyond the pool, because turning around felt like admitting I'd made a mistake I didn't know how to correct. The path bent sharply, then straightened, then bent again, each curve revealing another feature, another sign, another warning that appeared just a little too late. Scalding water appeared beside a stream that had already been crossed. Toxic gas was bolted near a vent whose fumes I had already inhaled. Restricted areas showed up nailed to a tree after I had entered the clearing it was meant to prohibit. It was like the park was documenting what had already happened, not trying to stop it. The realization settled slowly, heavy and unwelcome. These signs weren't for me. They were records. The trail widened into a broad, open basin that wasn't on any map I recognized. The ground here was darker, almost bruised in color, streaked with veins of red and black. Steam rose in thick columns, drifting and merging overhead until the sky disappeared behind a low, shifting ceiling. At the center of the basin stood a structure. Calling it a building felt wrong. It was more like an arrangement of barriers, concrete slabs sunk into the earth at odd angles, reinforced with rusted metal supports. Pipes ran between them, some capped, some open, all stained with mineral runoff. This was not something built for visitors. This was infrastructure. I approached slowly, every sense screaming now, cataloging details in a way that felt automatic, detached. Hazard tape fluttered from one of the slabs. Its colors faded. A door hung open on a hinge, leading into darkness. Above it, a sign was bolted crookedly. Closure lifted. I laughed. A short, brittle sound that echoed too much in the open space. Lifted for who? Inside, the air was hotter, thicker. The walls were slick with condensation, streaked with rust and mineral deposits. Pipes lined the ceiling, disappearing into the rock. The floor sloped downward, gently at first, then more steeply. The hiss I'd heard earlier was louder here, constant. It wasn't random. It pulsed, a steady rhythm that reminded me uncomfortably of breathing. I reached the end of the corridor and stopped. The chamber opened wide, carved directly into the earth. At its center was a massive pool, far larger than any I'd seen above. Its surface churned, slowly, colors shifting, patterns forming and dissolving. And around it, embedded into the rock walls, were more signs. Layered, overlapping, old and new, do not enter. Area closed. Extreme danger. No entry beyond this point. They formed a timeline. Newer signs bolted over older ones, messages stacking as if repetition might eventually be enough. I stepped closer to the pool, compelled by a sense that this was the point of all of it. The ground vibrated under my feet, subtle but undeniable. The pool responded, its surface rising and falling in time with the tremor. I understood then, with a clarity that made my hands shake. The features weren't reacting to me. They were reacting to the boundary being crossed. The park didn't set limits to keep people safe. It set limits to keep this contained. The pipes overhead shuddered. Steam vents along the walls activated in sequence, releasing thick clouds that filled the chamber. Heat surged. The pool began to boil in earnest, not just bubbling now, but rolling, agitated. I backed toward the exit, panic finally cutting through my composure. The corridor behind me was gone. Where the doorway had been, there was now only rock, smooth and seamless, as if it had never existed. The ground shook harder. Somewhere above, something shifted, a deep, resonant sound that traveled through stone. The signs on the walls rattled, some tearing free and dropping into the churning pool, their warnings swallowed without effect. I pressed my back against the rock, chest tight, watching as the environment reconfigured itself around the disturbance. This was the response. Boundaries closing, systems activating, the park doing what it was designed to do when containment failed. The pool surged upward, steam engulfing the chamber, heat pressing in from all sides. I raised my arms to shield my face, stumbling backward until there was nowhere left to go. As the ground split with a sound like tearing metal, I realized the final, horrible truth. The restricted zone wasn't where the danger began, it was where it had already escaped. And Yellowstone was not warning anyone anymore, because the signs were no longer instructions, they were acknowledgments. Story 4. Echoes Don't Always Come Back. Grand Canyon National Park, Arizona. I chose the descent because I knew it. That mattered to me more than it should have. Familiarity feels like armor in places that dwarf you. I'd hiked this trail before, years ago, with friends who talked too much and took too many photos. This time I wanted quiet, but not the kind that comes from uncertainty. I wanted the kind you get when you already know what's coming. The ranger at the rim glanced at my pack and asked how far I planned to go. Down to the saddle, I said. Then back up. He nodded. Plenty of people underestimate the climb out. I won't, I said, and meant it. The canyon opened beneath me, in that impossible way it always does. A vastness that doesn't feel real until you're already inside it. Layers of red and ochre and shadow stacked so deep they stopped looking like distance and started looking like time. The trail dropped away in clean switchbacks, carved into stone that held the sun's heat like memory. I checked my phone before starting. Service was already gone. That didn't bother me. I checked the time out of habit, then slipped the phone back into my pocket and stepped onto the trail. My boots struck rock, and the sound echoed outward. It came back wrong, not delayed, not faint, just altered, as if the canyon had reshaped it before returning it to me. The echo wasn't a mirror, it was an interpretation. I paused and stamped my foot again, harder. The sound bounced back from somewhere to my left, even though the wall there was farther away than the one directly ahead. I frowned, scanning the angles. Sound does strange things in big spaces. I knew that. I kept walking. The first mile went exactly as expected. The same rock formations I remembered, the same narrow ledges and sudden drops, the same temptation to stop every few minutes just to stare, to let the scale wash over you until your thoughts shrink. Other hikers passed me on their way up, faces flushed, eyes tired. We exchanged nods and brief warnings about heat and water and the climb back out. Their voices echoed oddly too, bending as they traveled, but that felt normal enough. After a while, the traffic thinned. The canyon swallowed sound the deeper I went. Footsteps softened. Voices from above arrived late, stretched thin. The wind threaded through gaps in the rock, but it didn't whistle. It just moved. I stopped at a bend where the trail cut sharply along a wall and looked down into a wide basin below. The view should have been different from the last time I'd seen it. It wasn't. The same outcropping jutted from the opposite wall. The same pale scar ran diagonally across the rock face like a scratch. The same shadow pooled in the basin, unmoving. I told myself memory was unreliable, that this was the nature of repetition. Big places reuse shapes. I kept descending. An hour later, my legs began to feel it. The pleasant ache that says you're using muscles for their intended purpose. I welcomed it. Pain is grounding. It confirms progress. I reached a landmark. I remembered clearly. A section where the trail widens briefly before narrowing again. There was a flat rock there, perfect for sitting. I remembered sitting on it years ago, eating trail mix, joking about how small the people above looked. The rock was there, so was the view. Identical. The angle of the light hadn't changed much, which made sense given how the canyon walls blocked the sun. But something about the sameness unsettled me. I checked my watch. Time had passed. Enough time that things should have shifted, even subtly. I clapped my hands. The sound cracked sharply and flew outward, swallowed by the space. I waited for it to return. It didn't. I waited longer, counting without meaning to. When the echo came back, it was faint and warped, like it had traveled too far to be intact, and it came from behind me. I turned slowly, scanning the trail above. Nothing moved. I laughed under my breath, a short, uneasy sound that disappeared the moment it left my mouth. Big place, I muttered, and kept going. The descent began to feel longer than it should have. Not harder, just stretched. The trail unfolded in familiar patterns, but the distance between landmarks seemed to expand. I would walk for what felt like minutes, then look up and realize I was still approaching a feature I thought I should have passed already. I told myself fatigue was messing with my sense of scale, that the canyon plays tricks on everyone. That was when I noticed the cairn. A small stack of stones sat just off the trail, neatly balanced. I remembered it. I was sure I did. I remembered touching it, adding a stone, then thinking better of it and leaving it alone. I paused beside it now and looked closely. The stones were arranged exactly as I remembered, too exactly. I took out my phone and snapped a photo, not for social media, just for reference. Proof that I was here, at this spot, at this time. Then I continued downward. The next hour blurred. The canyon walls rose higher, the sky narrowing to a thin ribbon above. The trail cut back and forth, each turn revealing more of the same, the colors repeating, the textures echoing themselves. I began to feel watched. Not in the way horror movies teach you to expect, but in the way landscapes can feel attentive. As if the canyon was aware of my movement, tracking it, measuring it. At another bend, I stopped and shouted, "Hello." My voice shot outward, thin and sharp. The echo returned almost immediately, too immediately. It came back from directly ahead, loud and clear, as if someone had shouted the word back at me from a few feet away. I stumbled back a step, heart kicking hard in my chest. The trail ahead was empty. I swallowed and tried again, softer this time. "Hey." The echo came back wrong again, stretched and low, like it had been dragged through gravel. I didn't try a third time. That was when I decided to turn around. The saddle was still a distance away, and something about the canyon had begun to feel off in a way I couldn't articulate. The smart move was to head back while I was still clear-headed. I pivoted carefully on the narrow trail and started the climb. It should have been immediately harder. The grade was noticeable. Gravity doesn't negotiate, but my legs didn't feel the difference. The trail ahead of me looked steeper, but my body moved as easily as it had on the way down. My breathing stayed steady. My pulse didn't spike. I climbed for several minutes before the unease crystallized into something colder. I wasn't gaining elevation. The view behind me didn't change. The layers of rock remained stacked exactly as they had been, the same formations visible at the same angles. The sky stayed the same thin strip. I stopped and turned around fully, scanning the canyon below. The basin I'd passed earlier was still there, just as distant. I checked my watch again. Time was passing. My body said I was moving. The canyon said otherwise. I started walking faster, then slower, testing. The trail responded visually, the ground rising and falling, but the larger space refused to shift. I clapped my hands again, hard enough to sting. The echo returned from somewhere above me this time, delayed and distorted. I laughed, sharp and brittle. Okay, I said. Okay. I told myself to focus on landmarks, on specifics. I walked until I reached the cairn again. The same cairn. I stared at it, my mind racing through explanations. Another cairn, similar placement, coincidence, memory overlap. I checked my phone and pulled up the photo I'd taken earlier. The image on the screen matched exactly what I was looking at now. Same stones, same shadows, same angle. The timestamp said it had been taken 20 minutes ago. My chest tightened. I took another photo. Then I turned and walked uphill again. Minutes passed. My legs should have begun to burn. They didn't. I reached the cairn again. Same arrangement. I checked the second photo, taken 5 minutes after the first. The canyon wasn't looping. I was, or worse, I was moving, but not in the direction I thought. A realization began to form, slow and nauseating. Each time I corrected my path, tried to retrace my steps, the space adjusted around me. Not snapping me back, not trapping me, but expanding just enough that my effort carried me farther away instead of closer. I wasn't failing to climb out. I was descending by believing I was ascending. I shouted again, a raw sound torn from my throat. This time, the echo didn't come back at all. I stood there, breathing hard now, finally feeling the effort, the exhaustion creeping in like something that had been waiting its turn. The canyon walls seemed farther apart than they had before. The basin below looked deeper, wider, its shadows darker. I looked up. The rim was gone. Not hidden, not blocked. Gone. The sky above stretched wider, farther away than it had any right to be. The contradiction settled in my mind with a terrible clarity. The canyon didn't trap people. It let them go. Every attempt to leave simply carried them deeper, farther, smaller, until the space between where they were and where they remembered being became too large to cross. I turned again, not sure which direction I was facing anymore, and took a step, because standing still felt like surrender. The sound of my boot striking rock echoed outward. It did not come back. Story 5. No signal, no distance. Denali National Park, Alaska. The first thing to go was the radio. That wasn't unusual. Denali eats signals the way snow eats sound. The ranger had warned me about that when I picked up my permit, tapping the laminated map with a gloved finger and reminding me that intermittent meant expect nothing. I nodded like someone who understood the difference. I was alone by design, not in the dramatic sense, not chasing some purity test of wilderness. I just wanted to move without negotiating. Denali allows that, if you respect it enough to ask permission first. The bus dropped me off at a gravel pullout that barely deserved the name. No sign, no marker, just a widening of road and a sweep of tundra stretching away toward low hills and distant white. The bus idled while I stepped down, then pulled away without ceremony, its engine noise fading faster than it should have. When it was gone, the quiet pressed in immediately. Not silence. Denali doesn't do silence. There was wind, distant and constant, moving across grass and stone. There was the soft scrape of my boots, my own breathing. But the space between those sounds felt enormous, like they were isolated islands floating in a vast, empty sea. I checked my radio out of habit, Static. I adjusted the antenna, tried a different channel. Nothing but a flat hiss. "That's fine," I said, mostly to hear my own voice. It sounded small. I started walking. There are no trails where I was headed. That's part of the appeal. You choose a direction, pick landmarks, and trust your sense of scale. The land rolls gently, deceptive in its softness. Hills that look close take hours to reach. Distances lie. I fixed my eyes on a dark ridge in the distance, using it as my first point. The sky was high and pale. Clouds stretched thin like they'd been pulled too far. The air was cold enough to sting my lungs without hurting. After an hour, I checked my GPS. The screen lit up slowly, like it didn't want to wake. Coordinates appeared. A dot marked my position. The ridge ahead looked no closer than it had when I started. I frowned, then shrugged it off. Perspective plays tricks in wide places. That's common knowledge. I kept walking. The tundra didn't change much. Low shrubs, rocks flecked with lichen, patches of snow tucked into shaded dips. Everything looked both near and far at the same time. Sound traveled oddly too. The wind would rush past my ears, then vanish completely, leaving a vacuum that made my heartbeat feel loud. I tried the satellite phone next. No connection. I waited, watching the little icon spin, then disappear. That was less fine. I stopped walking and turned in a slow circle, scanning the horizon. Nothing moved. No animals. No other hikers. The land looked undisturbed, untouched, like it hadn't noticed me yet. I took a breath and reminded myself of the rules. Don't panic. Don't rush. Distance here is patient. You have to be more patient. I started again, adjusting my course slightly, aiming for a lighter patch of ground near the ridge that might be a gravel wash. Something distinct. Time passed in a way that felt honest. My legs worked. My breath deepened. Sweat cooled quickly on my back. I stopped once to drink water, watching the level in the bottle drop, proof that something was changing. When I looked up again, the lighter patch of ground was still just as far away. That was when the thought crept in, unwanted but persistent. I should be closer. I checked the GPS again. The dot had moved. The numbers confirmed it. The landscape disagreed. I told myself not to trust my eyes. Eyes are bad at distance. Instruments are better. An hour later, the GPS froze. The screen stayed on, but the coordinates stopped updating. The dot trembled in place, then snapped back to where it had been before, like a rubber band pulled too far. I turned it off and on again. Same result. I laughed quietly, because laughing felt better than acknowledging the alternative. "No signal," I said, testing the words. They didn't echo. They just disappeared. I walked until my legs ached in a way that felt earned, until my shoulders complained under the pack, until my breath rasped faintly in my chest. The ridge ahead did not grow. It didn't retreat either. It simply existed, constant, like a picture hung on the horizon. I began choosing nearer landmarks, a cluster of rocks, a bend in the ground, things that couldn't lie as convincingly. I reached the rocks. That felt good, solid, proof of progress. Beyond them, the ridge still waited. I climbed a small rise to get a better view, expecting the land to rearrange itself with elevation. Sometimes perspective snaps into place when you change angles. At the top, the world opened wider, too wide. The ridge wasn't closer from up there. If anything, it looked farther away, its edges softened, details blurred. The space between us felt stretched, elastic, as if my movement had somehow increased it. I stood there longer than I meant to, staring, trying to force my brain to reconcile what I was seeing with what I knew. I tried the radio again, static, but beneath it, just barely, there was something else. A rhythm, not voices, not words. A repeating pulse, too regular to be interference. I adjusted the volume, the channel, the pulse stayed. I realized, with a cold twist in my stomach, that it matched my steps when I walked. I shut the radio off. I changed direction entirely, angling away from the ridge toward what I knew should be the ranger station. I'd seen it from the bus, a low structure tucked into a rise, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. I walked for a long time. The land sloped gently downward, then up again. The wind shifted, clouds thickened, then thinned. Time moved. My body confirmed it. Then I saw the station. It sat on the horizon, squat and familiar, its outline clear against the pale land. Relief hit me hard enough to make my knees weak. I laughed, loud this time, a sound that felt almost too big for the space. "There you are," I said. I walked toward it. Minutes passed. The station did not grow. I walked faster. Nothing changed. I broke into a jog, pack bouncing, breath burning now, the first real strain of the day. The station stayed the same size, the same distance, like it was printed onto the sky. I stopped, gasping, staring at it. It was perfect, unchanged, untouchable. I checked my GPS again, even though I didn't expect anything. The screen was blank. No map, no coordinates, just a soft gray glow. I tried the satellite phone again. Nothing. I turned in a slow circle, scanning for any other point of reference. The ridge, the rocks. Everything looked evenly spaced, equidistant, like a model viewed from the wrong angle. That was when the thought finally settled, heavy and undeniable. Denali wasn't vast because it was large. It was vast because it did not allow things to be close. Proximity was conditional here, temporary, something the land granted when it felt like it, then withdrew. The ranger station wasn't far away. It was unreachable. I started walking again, because stopping felt worse, because movement still felt like the one thing that belonged to me. Each step carried me forward in my body, but not in space. The station ahead stayed exactly where it was. The land beneath my feet felt endless, patient. I don't know how long I walked after that. The sky began to change in ways I couldn't quite track. Light flattening, shadows losing meaning. My legs burned now, my lungs worked hard. My pack felt heavier with each step. Still, nothing came closer. The radio crackled suddenly in my pack, loud enough to make me flinch. I fumbled it out, hands shaking. A voice came through, faint but clear. "Distance enforced. Remain where you are." The words broke up, drowned in static. "Repeat," I said into the radio, desperate. Only the pulse answered, steady and patient. I looked up at the station again, at the promise of shelter that refused to approach me, and for the first time I understood that rescue wasn't delayed. It was impossible. Denali wasn't keeping me here. It was simply making sure I could never arrive anywhere else. I kept walking, because stopping felt like admitting that distance was not something I could cross anymore, and because somewhere between one step and the next, with my breath burning and my legs shaking and the station fixed forever ahead of me, I began to realize that if proximity itself had rules here, then exhaustion probably did too, and I didn't know how close you had to be to rest before the land decided you were already too far. You have reached the end of tonight's visit, the last marked point before the park goes back to doing what it has always done, quietly, without witnesses, without explanation. If any of these stories stayed with you, if you felt the air change when the rules stopped applying, if you caught yourself thinking about how easily a familiar overlook becomes unfamiliar, how quickly a trail can stop leading out, how distance can stay the same no matter how long you walk, do not let the trip end here. Subscribe to join me for more journeys into places people trust, places with maps and ranger stations and warning signs, where the danger does not rush, it adjusts, and where the most terrifying moment is realizing the environment has already responded to you. Tell me in the comments which park stayed in your head the longest, which story felt too close to home, which detail made your stomach drop, the afternoon that would not end, the silence that contained, the boundary that reacted too late, the echo that returned wrong, or the landmark that refused to get closer. Like the video so these stories reach others who stand at the same trailheads, who take the same photos, who believe the danger is always the obvious thing, the wildlife, the weather, the cliffs, and not the slow, quiet moment where the park stops behaving like a place built for people. And if you have your own national park story, a section of trail that did not match the map, a closure sign that appeared after you crossed, a sound that vanished too cleanly, an echo that came back from the wrong direction, a stretch of distance you could not close, or a moment you walked towards safety and realized it wasn't getting any nearer, you are always welcome to share it. Send your experience to the business email in the channel bio, and it may become part of a future Entity Shadows episode. Thank you for listening, for stepping past the overlook rails, for following the marked paths into unmarked moments, for staying with me through places so famous people forget they are still wilderness. And until next time, stay where the signs can still be read. Trust your instincts when the land feels too patient, And if you ever find yourself walking towards something that will not come closer, turn back before you realize it was never meant for you to arrive. And remember, the dark awaits.